Hey and welcome, I'm Hammy and today we'll be taking a look at Overwatch's 11th digital comic Binary, in which we see our favourite E54 unit show up in Sweden of all places, terrify the locals accidentally, and then be hunted down by a familiar face, with slightly surprising results. We'll be taking a quick look through talking points and interesting bits of the comic in some analysis, along with a little light speculation on what new Overwatch story and lore we may have learned from it too. Suffice to say, this contains massive spoilers. The link for the comics in the description below if you haven't read it already, or head over to comic.playoverwatch.com or Madefire. Please read it first if you haven't already, and then come back to let me know your thoughts in the comments. Firstly, let's quickly summarise the story. We join our story in northern Sweden, where a teen couple are sneaking out after dark on a moonlit night. As the couple enjoy each other's company in the woods, seemingly close to either the coastline or a lake, a noise in the distance unsettles them, followed by the appearance of a rather familiar bird. As the Bastion we know and love surprises them, complete with octopus, starfish and all, the couple flee, with the story making the local news. As locals gather to discuss how to deal with the threat, a voice from the back of the room pours scorn on their plans to take out the Bastion with rifles. It's none other than Torbjorn. Saying that he knows the things inside and out, Torb volunteers his services to deal with what he sees as a broken bot. As Torb and a local police figure set up to help deal with the threat, we discover a bit more about why Torbjorn's such a Bastion expert. He actually helped in their creation before the First Omnic Crisis. As Bastion walks towards Torb's bait, Ganymede jumps on top of the supposed lure, with the policeman jumping out and opening fire. As Bastion retreats, an unusual action according to Torbjorn, the policeman decides to round up his fellow policemen to finish the job. Tracking down Bastion, Torb prepares to engage, only to see that Bastion appears to be helping yet more wildlife with their home building activities. As Torb tries to work out what's going on, the police return and attack, with Torb's attempts to reason with them to call off the attack unsuccessful. As the police refuse to let Torbjorn track the unit down, he decides to take matters into his own hands, with slightly sticky results. Finally, as Torb catches up with Bastion and takes the unusual Omnic under his wing, the two stroll off together, to destinations unknown. Here's some of the interesting things I enjoyed from the comic, and a little bit of analysis too. Firstly, we see a little hint as to what Bastion may have been up to recently, and perhaps how he's been able to be undetected relatively for so long. As our friend has presumably come out of the water near the wood where he stumbles upon the two teenagers, it gives us a way of knowing how Bastion's been able to travel somewhat unspotted for periods of time. This does beg the question though, he mustn't have been too far out to sea for too long at any one period, as otherwise Ganymede wouldn't have been able to follow him for any great distance. The other thing as well, of course, is that we're not precisely sure when the last Bastion happened, so we don't know how long Bastion's been travelling or surviving for, and indeed what time frame it's taken for him to travel from the south of Germany to the north of Sweden. But there's quite a bit of land that needs covering there. Or am I overthinking that a bit too much? Do let me know your thoughts in the comments. Secondly, we learn a bit more about Torbjorn's history with Omnics and with the Bastion unit specifically. Now, relatively recently, we've had a voice line between Zarya and Torbjorn where Zarya says, "The suffering of my people rests heavily on your shoulders, Torbjorn." And Torbjorn says, "Believe me, I don't need reminding." So, we never had any specifics on the reasoning behind that, although we could take a reasonable guess, and now we do. Torb states to the policeman and townsfolk that he knows the Bastion inside and out, and later when the two are setting a trap, the policeman also mentions that he found out that Torbjorn helped create the Bastions back before the war, a fact that clearly still weighs on Torbjorn to this day. If Zarya knows about it, and this policeman found it out, it's clearly reasonably public knowledge in some way or another, not a massive secret. From his bio and his past comic Destroyer, we know that Torbjorn has been travelling the world trying to make sure his inventions don't cause more suffering or havoc, and perhaps his hunt for this Bastion unit is part of that. Indeed, in Destroyer we saw Torbjorn's relationship with the Titan that he helped design, and he was also very familiar with as well, before it was corrupted and changed into a bit more of a mercenary design by his ex-colleague Sven. Now, interestingly, Torbjorn also mentions a key thing, that this Bastion unit has been sighted a number of times, but it hasn't attacked anyone yet. So it sounds as though that Torbjorn has actually been keeping a good eye on tracking this particular Bastion, with good reason probably. If there's no other Bastion units that have been reported in a while, or it's been travelling for a long time, then it would naturally pique Torbjorn's curiosity. Also, the fact that it's not attacked anyone is clearly a big interest to him too. He might have a slight self-interest in this, as we'll see later in the comic. We also had a bit more of a look at Bastion units and how they're perceived to work as well as their programming, and through Torb we learn a little bit more about the nature of Bastion units, what they might have been like during the Omnic Crisis, and perhaps, who knows, this could extend to other Omnics that were involved too, if this is code and behaviour, perhaps like the predecessor to Orisa's OR-15 chassis, the OR-14, that we know that was produced in Africa and used by the Omniums during the First Omnic Crisis as well. Because the Bastion is not attacking people, Torbjorn sees it as being as broken as a result. The self-repair module apparently may also be broken, and we also learn that these units were programmed to fight against any odds until they get shut down. Now, if that's a behaviour that was in the other Omnics, not just the Bastion chassis during the First Omnic Crisis, then these units would have had kind of like no fear, no self-preservation instinct, and no surrender. Truly, they must have been a terrifying foe. While we're on the subject of nature, Bastion's current nature, there's a few changes from the Last Bastion that we've seen as well, and indeed from that description that Torbjorn gave as to how Bastions used to act. In the Last Bastion, we saw Bastion overcome or decide against following the imperative of its attack programming. Now, we're not precisely sure, as I said, when the Last Bastion was set. Perhaps it depends on the age of Ganymede, if this bird is not a descendant of the original. All Bastion's doing in this comic really is walking around and helping out animals, and in a nice touch, helping the beavers build a dam or nest with twigs is an echoing of the first learning that Bastion saw and learnt in the Last Bastion when we saw Ganymede moving twigs around and Bastion ultimately helping Ganymede with his nest. Bastion, quite the conservationist and wildlife enthusiast, is also examining flowers, offering one to Torbjorn, which I note that Torbjorn kind of keeps, and then investigates a squirrel, even as he's heading off with Torbjorn. Last but not least, it was interesting to have a think about Torbjorn and Bastion together and what the future might hold for them. As the two stroll off into the woods, with Ganymede flying overhead, we had a slight clue perhaps as to Torbjorn's motivations for taking Bastion under his wing earlier in the comic. When he's talking with the policeman, trying to convince them to spare this Bastion and let him take up the search, Torb actually mentions this Bastion is different, and if it can change, with a pensive look and an unfinished sentence, much like the pensive look he had when the policeman mentioned that he knew that Torbjorn was part responsible for the Bastion unit's design. Torb's part, still to be more deeply defined in the Omnic Crisis, clearly still weighs heavily on him. We know that he was involved in the design of the Titan, now the Bastion as well, so two units that were kind of figureheads, big symbols of the Crisis that strike fear into people to this very day, he is kind of involved with. It feels like Torb, in the process of trying to atone for his actions, feels like Bastion might hold some answers. And Bastion also appears to be forcing Torbjorn to confront his feelings about Omnics, and perhaps his old fears about artificial intelligence. As Bastion has been able to show some compassion and kind of a peaceful and benign nature, Torbjorn's got a bit of thinking to do, and who knows, maybe Bastion can help him find out the answer to whatever's causing the second Omnic Crisis that Atlas News is citing as happening in the Overwatch world right now. Either way, Bastion's next introduction by Torbjorn to anyone human should be an interesting one. I can't wait for that. Thanks very much for tuning in to this analysis of Overwatch's binary digital comic. If you like this video, please hit that like button below, subscribe and comment with what you thought of the comic, what you think might happen next for Bastion and Torbjorn, and anything you'd like to know about the Overwatch lore. I really appreciate hearing what you all think. I've actually analysed all 10 of the other Overwatch comics, all of the animated shorts, lore sources and more, so if you'd like to see more about the story and world of Overwatch, do check out the playlist I've linked below. My regular series of Overwatch hero interactions, lore and voice lines, Easter eggs, map lore, and so much more are all on this channel too. Until next time, I've been Hammy, take it easy.